Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's public lenders session. I'm seeing that everyone is trickling in, getting settled. We'll just give it a couple more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, it looks like we have a significant number of people on. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to start by introducing today's moderator, Sharon Bennett. Sharon is the Director of Financial Consulting for Housing Finance Training at the California Housing Partnership, where she leads efforts to strengthen nonprofit developers' financial capacity across the state. She brings deep expertise in affordable housing finance, training, and technical assistance, and has been an incredible resource to the field. We're thrilled to have her guiding today's conversation. Welcome, Sharon, and now I'll pass it over to you to help guide today's conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily. Really appreciate it. And also proud to be here as a SCANPH board member too, and really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this really important conversation. It feels like uh, things are always in flux in our field, but this year has seen a bit more flux than usual. We have new programs coming online. We have big changes from federal programs. And so it's great to have you all here. I'll introduce you each as we go through, and the format for today, we'll have each of our speakers talk about sort of current state of affairs and looking forward to next year for their agencies. And then we will have Q&A at the end. About 20 minutes or so are set aside for that. So if you have questions as we go through this, please put them in, use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. That way we'll be able to see them and pull those out as the time goes on. We won't be looking at the chat for questions and answers. All right, great. So we have a lot of folks and a lot of ground to cover, so we might as well dive in. And we're fully in back to school mode. So as y'all get started, I would like you also to mention what was your favorite or maybe least favorite school subject when you were in elementary school, just so we get some personal details here. But that being said, we'll start with Zach Olmsted. He is Chief Deputy Director at HCD. And Zach, please kick us off and let us know what's going on and what did you like to do in school?
Thank you. Happy to be here. That's a tough one. Let's see. I would probably say I enjoyed history a lot in elementary school. I just have memories, as probably everyone does, of doing the missions and all the general, I was in California, all the general kind of history lessons. There's some, or maybe I'm just saying that because I have a fourth grader doing that right now. And so that's what's fresh on my brain. Um, so yeah, and having gone just to 3 back to school nights for my 3 children, 3 different ones, I appreciate the back to school reference. Any other questions for me, Sharon, before you want me to jump in?
No, no.
Use up all my time talking about myself, but you guys can happily hear about HCD as well. I appreciate being here. I'll just start by saying, I know this is a funders forum, but from our state's perspective here at HCD, it is really a time of transformation. And a lot of like our funding for what we're still doing, what we have done, we're looking at, is it creating the impact we're hoping? So we'll talk a little bit about, I think, what we're seeing there as well. The most kind of prominent, biggest source of funding we have follows the passage of last year's proposition, and it allowed us to continue to fund what we call Home Key Plus now, which is our Home Key program with a behavioral health focus, a little bit over $2 billion. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But that's obviously over 2 billion. It's a big amount. And so we are continuing to make awards kind of on a rolling basis. And then there's a lot of activity here, and this does relate to funding, of course, with the transition to creating a new standalone housing and homelessness agency, kind of dedicated to our work. It doesn't really change necessarily HCD, but by elevating, of course, that issue to a standalone agency, we're very involved in that and we're excited about that. And there are components of it which certainly will relate to funding and hopefully how we continue to streamline things there. I will just note, I think we've made, and you'll see different numbers out there, but just HCD alone, I think it's $30 billion in investments since 2019 towards housing and homelessness writ large. And, you know, like I was saying, we want to see a connection to that role as a funder with those real results on the ground. And I think there's reason to believe that that funding is working, right? If we're just talking LA, the preliminary numbers show that we're going to see close to a 10% drop in homelessness in LA County, about 8% drop in LA City, and then all across certainly Southern California, we're seeing, I think, a lot of impact there. I do think there's reason to believe that the approach we're doing is working. It's not just the money, but it's also the attention. We've certainly, as a department, taken a big role in accountability, enforcement of a lot of new laws. It's not just one thing that leads to impact or results, it's the combination. You know, it's not just money, it's not just policy. But I think we also can tell that it's probably working because we are also outperforming the rest of the nation in these areas. Well, I think a lot of folks would look around and say, oh, I'm not seeing a difference. Well, we saw national increases in homelessness in 2024 go up 18%. California was just up 3%. Unsheltered homelessness barely grew in California, and it went up and across the nation by 7%. So, you know, what's different, right? We've been devoting a lot more attention there, you know, and I think we would probably say, like, if we hadn't done any of that, we probably would have been right on track, if not more so, given the cost of living in our state. And so it's been really, really validating to be part of kind of this administration that's kind of created this structural and foundational model, which we're seeing duplicated, you know, throughout the country. We typically always say in California, not just in housing and homelessness, but that we like to lead and the nation follows, and I think that's true. I mentioned accountability. We have a housing accountability unit here, created in this administration under this governor. And, you know, that's really getting more proactive, right? And looking at how did we get here, breaking down some of the systematic barriers that have kind of stood in the way of why do we not build more housing. We're seeing real results there as well, right? The attention we're placing, it's not even all about every action, but it's the signaling of those actions. And we have seen the timelines across the state shrink from what they were in, for example, just for a housing application to be approved for new housing. It was 145 days on average just for that step in 2018. And in 2024, that's 58 days. So under half reduction, right? Less than 2 months there. And there's other kind of shortenings along the permitting side and the stuff we've seen as well. We've certainly shrunk significantly those development timelines, which obviously is very critical component. If not like really glitzy, it's very important part of making sure we're getting housing aligned faster. And that work in our housing accountability work has unlocked what we've attributed to about 42,000 housing units since 2021. The other cool thing is in last year, affordable housing made up 20% of all the housing that was built in California last year. We know that based on the annual progress report data that we have. Obviously, that's a very significant amount of affordable housing as a percentage of our development. And so just another indication of how like we've prioritized in those way. Obviously, it's a partnership with a lot of folks we're going to hear from today, local partnerships, certainly probably many developer service providers and the like. So really just want to say thank you to everyone here because it's not, like I said, just like it's not one program or one policy, obviously it's not just one level of government either. And so, you know, I will say to just like kind of the elephant in the room, certainly engaging in a lot of turmoil still at the federal level, uncertainty. Our funding remains intact that we provide there for now. And we still have quite a bit of other resources outside of even Home Key Plus that are still going out for housing for both state and federal resources. many of us that have been in the field a long time would have been thrilled at like just a couple 100 million, right? But we have, I think, still 2.5 billion still to award in programs. So there's certainly no shortage of money. Maybe off our historic highs of a couple years ago when we were putting out, 5+ billion a year. But we're very soon to be releasing the awards from the multifamily supernova that we issued earlier this year. That will be about 420 million in resources. We'll also be issuing awards for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program in December. And we're very hopeful that that will continue to be re-upped in the budget negotiations that are ongoing right now. And then, while not a development source specifically, the HAP program, so the Housing and Homelessness Assistance Program, that is now under HCD's purview. And so those are the homelessness awards. You see a lot of talk about that go out to cities, counties, continuum of care. It's quite substantial, right? We'll have about 760 million going out in rolling awards that reflect even actually last year's budget money with kind of more to come. And so that's a real important piece I just want to highlight for a second, because what we have done through the negotiations at the administration level for that program is we've made a couple adjustments, and this is kind of in the accountability space, where we won't allow jurisdictions, and we kind of get to approve now they're the uses within. It's a very broad eligible uses for that program, but essentially we will not permit new shelters to open, new kind of interim housing to be pursued until there can be an assurance that the stuff you already have online is preserved, and that includes your permit supported housing portfolio. And so, there is a real opportunity here for folks to advocate within their local governments, their continuums of care, to kind of talk about the real needs there. And I think that's really critically important, as there's a lot of worry, right, about federal resources and the like. This is a source that will help preserve what you have and let you do more, of course, but it can be a real gap financing tool as well. That is certainly an eligible use within new housing, which we're already seeing it used in new housing. Part of our accountability efforts, which you may see or you may not see, there's still a number of jurisdictions who have not expended even many past years HAP dollars, and we're basically saying, well, hey, there's this affordable housing development, this permanent supported housing development in your jurisdiction. That might be a really good recipient of the dollars you have unexpended. Something like, think about that. Your advocacy will certainly help us do that. And so I wanted just to call that out. I mentioned Home Key Plus. Happy to answer any questions about that. It's kind of the continuation of our Home Key program. Prop 1 gave us over $2 billion to continue to award with still for folks who are homeless, but who have a co-occurring kind of behavioral health situation. And so we continued, we were still receiving applications. We amended even our notice of funding availability recently to provide even more incentive to serve veterans, because about half that money is targeted towards veterans. And so we do have a lot of applications in for veterans, and we're going to fund them, but to the degree we can make sure we're balanced in those applications, we put even greater incentives to serve veterans there by way of greater operation support and the like. And so we're really pleased that we're continuing to be able to fund that program. I think just within Home Key Plus, we've already announced about 850 permanent supportive housing units that have been funded. Obviously, a lot more to come. And it's rolling applications. And so even though there might be a number of applications in from your jurisdiction, the way we do it is kind of hold regional funds for a while, and then it's kind of open season. So please, one of the hallmarks of this program is we ask folks if they come in for a pre-application consultation, so we can help them help folks navigate it. So please don't hesitate to reach out in those places. It's a range of things, certainly. An adaptive reuse, hotel motel conversion is still a very common type of thing, but we even will be able to fund new construction if it can be done quickly. Speed is a hallmark of the program, but we're very flexible. Just come in the door and we'll help you figure it out to the best of our abilities. And certainly, like I said, we're trying to promote folks thinking about how they can best serve veterans as well, and have a lot of incentives there. So I do hope that folks check out the amendments that we have kind of put in place there for that program, as it is the biggest source that we still have. We still have some other sources, but certainly when you're talking billions instead of millions, it's pretty robust. So I'll stop there. I know I jumped around a little bit, but I want to be respectful of time and allow for plenty of questions. So thank you for having HCD here. It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Sharon.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach. I really appreciate, as someone whose head has just been in multifamily supernova and then LA disaster multifamily supernova, hearing about the non-funding aspects, like the accountability and the timeline, speeding up that y'all have been working on. It's good to be reminded of that and keep that in mind. So I appreciate that part of it. Thanks. All right. Well, next we are going to hear from Marina Wyant. She is Executive Director of TCAC and CIDLAC. And Marina, before we jump into your slides, I'd love to hear your favorite school subjects when you were younger.
So I thought it was supposed to be my least favorite, and
You can
so
also do that.
I was generally like a kid that liked school. And my least favorite in elementary school was PE. But it was not because I didn't like I'm like an anti-sports person. But our PE teacher at the school was like a particularly misogynistic man that I was at such a young age already understood and realized that when like the boys were like outside playing and the girls were helping clean up. So that was, we also spent like 4 years trying to learn how to juggle. So that was my least favorite PE or subject in school.
Relatable. My grade school PE teacher would sing Sherry Baby at me in a very terrible falsetto. And so I can't stand that song to this day. But anyway, we'll move away from grade school trauma and move into our update from CIDLAC and TCAC.
Great. So first, thanks for having me. I was here last year. I'm embarrassed. I think I'm the only one with a PowerPoint, which is most unusual. I'm not, okay. It's unusual for me to have a PowerPoint, but I wanted to make sure I hit sort of all the top line items for this group today. So move next slide. Next slide. All right. We had a mid-year reg change in response to the major changes that happened at the federal level. Okay, sorry, next slide, because these are all just like title slides. So as many of you know, the Big Beautiful Bill was passed at the federal level on July 4th. The two major changes that came out of that were both that the 9% program will be increased permanently by 12% beginning on January 1st. And then for any project that is issuing bonds or issuing at least 5% of basis in bonds as of January 1st, they only need to have 25% of basis in bonds. And so we really wanted to take quick action to start implementing these changes right away. And so we put out emergency regs not probably like 2 or 3 weeks after the bill passed. They were adopted on August 5th. And in particular, they lowered the 50% test to 25% test beginning for round 3. We also address issues related to how we were going to do the surplus and how we're going to do the skipping rule in an earlier emergency reg package in the year. And then we also, in light of the 50% test lowering to 25%, we would therefore be able to do nearly double the amount of volume in each pull and set aside, which would really kind of skew the way the state tax credit would have been administered for round 3. So in response to that, we set sort of caps to the amount of enhanced state credits that can go into each of the pools for round 3 in order to spread those through and we used the historic average of how much was going into each of the pools and set-asides in order to get to those numbers. And then because all of these changes were happening in the middle of round two, and yet all round two projects would qualify for the 25% test if they were going to be closing in the new year, we really wanted to create it. We didn't want to mandate projects to restructure. There's also some projects that have to close in 2025 to retain DDA status. And just there is a financing challenge that projects might have from suddenly having to restructure, equity pricing is down. And so mindful of that, we didn't want to make it a mandatory restructure, but we wanted to create a voluntary incentive program for 2025 round one and round two projects that would be closing in 2026. In particular, projects that might not be ready by their closing deadline and would need an extension anyway, to encourage them to restructure their deals. And so as you see from this slide, we asked in order to take advantage of this incentive, you needed to let TCAC or CIDLAC know by the end of August. And we had 44 projects opt in. I think 4 of them were round one projects. So really the 80% of round two projects opted in to reduce their bond request. We brought back 600 million of bonds that we're putting back in for round three. The updated bond availability was posted at the end of last week. So hopefully everyone filling out applications saw that and we're feeling good about their odds as a result of this. For looking forward, we typically do an end of year reg cycle. We are currently working on draft language right now. The goal is to get draft language out by probably early October. For adoption at our December 10th meeting. And I'll talk a little bit more later about what you might see in those regs. For 2026, people are always very curious about the calendar. I don't expect significant changes from how we allocated bonds and credits this year to 2026. So if you go to the next slide, I think you can still expect 3 CIDLAC rounds, 2 9% rounds. This year we broke up preservation into only 2 rounds. The first round also only was for projects that didn't request state credit. So I think the general feedback from folks was positive about how we handled the rounds. Some of this will be different just in light of the 25% test. I am expecting to have more bonds available for AC rehab deals. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit later. But so that also will likely kind of fall into those projects having 3 rounds instead of only 2 rounds like they did this year. All right, so just looking real quick back on the current year, on the 9% project, a 9% program, we received 141 applications for the year. We are putting out, you can go to the next slide. Our preliminary recommendation list is expected to go out next week for round 2, but we're expecting a total of about 52 projects. So I think that's 27 projects for round 2 to be funded. We expect there'll be a wait list. So a couple other projects might be able to get through that way. For looking ahead to 2026, as I mentioned, we had that 12% increase starting in 2026. I think the way we are thinking to implement that is to actually raise the credit limit from 2.5 million to 2.8 million per project. That is a 12% increase. So, I think we were historically have been reluctant to raise that just because it would cut down on the amount of projects that could get funded. But with this 12% increase, it would allow sort of the same-ish amount of projects, still maybe more, but would allow a little bit more of the larger projects or more expensive projects to get covered. In general, for the regulations on the tax credit side, we're pretty much looking at mostly cleanup. There's been I've been in this position for a little over a year and a half now. And, my favorite time of year is the appeal period. And I say that with a chuckle because it mostly raises for me issues of like, wait, why are we asking for this? So, a lot of times we get DQs or point letters for things that feel somewhat irrelevant to the project or to the big picture. And so kind of each year I feel like we're chipping away at some of those pieces and just trying to make the program a little bit simpler where it makes sense too. As I mentioned earlier, as part of the emergency regs, we did set those limits for the state credits. That was really in the regs just limited to round 3 of this year. So I do think we'll see kind of I'd love people's input if they are happy with how this rolls out in round 3. But we probably will need to be doing something more permanently for 2026 related to state credits. And then lastly, we are planning to bring back application workshops probably in December, which we have not done, I think, since probably pandemic period. And so you can look forward to that coming up. All right, on the 4% program, we had made 4.8 billion in bonds available to Corp this year. That was 93% of our total volume cap. We had for rounds 1 and 2, a total of 220 applications and 88 projects awarded. So like a 3-to-1 ratio of success. For round 3, including that 600 million in return bonds, we have nearly 2 billion in bonds available for round 3. So that's pretty significant. Plus we have the 25% test now. We received 165 applications by the due date yesterday. So, if you apply, you're probably much better chance of winning than any other year in the past 5 years. So we'll see. Hopefully all these projects are feasible. Like I've been sort of like estimating 100-ish projects could get funded. I don't know. I haven't gotten the numbers yet from staff on what was the total bond request for those applications. But looking good. Let's see. Okay, next. Regs. Okay, so we're gonna be, again, really continuing to look at how the 25% test is rolling out. We had put into place in the regs the 30% to 40% max bond request. My real hope is that folks request 30%. We might actually tweak the tiebreaker to make mandatory that it's a 30%. So people don't keep gaming tiebreakers to lower bond request and then coming back for supplementals. So, we kind of want to get out of that process. I don't want to have to keep setting aside bonds for supplementals. There's really no need for that when we have this much volume cap available. Again, I think we're looking at doing some pretty major general cleanup in the SIDLAC regs, just to fix sort of the organization of how the regulations read. This gets real technical for people who get really into the weeds of the regs, but there's very specific core programmatic regulations that are in the general rules. And so just kind of getting things to be sorted out to make a lot more sense and a lot more readable. And then lastly, as I mentioned earlier, I think we're really looking at the AC rehab pool and what that might look like. I've been, I'm not the biggest fan of having sort of a preservation pool and then another rehab pool, especially when we can do more now in the AC rehab side. So I'm looking at potentially kind of having one AC rehab pool where we use scoring priorities to really target, the first tranche of projects that would get that could score max points in that pool would be at-risk projects. For example, I just don't think at-risk projects should ever lose to like a year 15 resyndication. So really trying to restructure a little bit using point scores for how we prioritize within AC rehab. And again, have more resources available for those projects after so many years of tight resources. I think that's it. And I think I hit my 15 minutes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfectly on time. Thanks, Marina. Really, really appreciate that. Some really welcome news in there and breaking news. So looking forward to seeing the full suite of materials for next year, and encourage everybody on the line to take a look, take advantage of that public comment period. It's participating in the process is really key, and always appreciate your willingness to hear from all of us and our many, many opinions. Thanks, Marina. All right, up next, we have our newest entry into the acronym soup, La Casa, the LA County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency. And from that organization, we have Claudia Lima, who's the Managing Director of Strategic Investments there. Welcome, Claudia. And yeah, tell us your favorite or least favorite school subject before you hop into your slides. Oh, and sorry, one more thing for the attendees. Please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to enter questions. We will then get to those in the last 20 minutes or so of today. So enter them anytime and we'll get to them. Go ahead, Claudia.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, just fine.
All right. Okay, so thank you so much for having me here. Yes, I am the very newest member of this funders forum that SCANPH has been having for several years now. Thank you so much. So as far as the question, I think I'm going to go with the most favorite. I think it's easier for me to just remember that since I was in elementary school, math was always one of my favorite subjects. All the way up to college, I always enjoyed math and all of the different versions that we had to take, right? And I think I'm going to also agree with Marina that sometimes the least favorite one was PE, but that's because sometimes when I was in elementary school, my grandmother would put on very cute shoes. And so running in very cute shoes really didn't lend itself for PE. So that's what I remember about PE. But either way, good times. So yeah, let's get started. Next slide, please. So as many of you know, Measure A was passed. Voters voted for the sales tax that funds La Casa. It is estimated that approximately 1 billion will come in on an annual basis. Of that amount, about 35.75% comes to La Casa, which ends up being approximately 383 million in the first year. And 60% of that funds production, preservation, and ownership. So a substantial amount of money. Now, La Casa doesn't get to keep all of it. About 70% of that is passed through to the eligible jurisdictions, and the agency keeps about $69 million after everything's divvied up. Next slide, please. Now, these are the eligible jurisdictions. There are the big 5 cities plus the rest are COGS. But overall, La Casa is working with all 88 cities that make up LA County plus unincorporated counties. So these are the amounts that are being passed through to the different eligible jurisdictions. And it is important to note that each jurisdiction will be administering its own NOFA specific to the region to answer and respond to the needs of their regions. Next slide, please. So the agency La Casa, as I mentioned, we keep 30% of those funds. The information that is in this presentation is only related to that 30% of the La Casa agency money that will be in the upcoming NOFA, and will cover a lot of different products. Next slide, please. So this is overall a very simplified way of the 2025-2026 NOFA for the county. Again, the agency funds. We are actually leveraging a portion of the agency funds to close on a social bond later on this year. So for our first NOFA, we are going to be offering a total of 252 million for the various products and types that you see here. It covers a range of products, but also it will cover a range of housing types, which is important. Everything from multifamily rental, community land trust, homeownership, and preservation, NOAA. So it covers a little bit of everything. The NOFA will have a much more detailed presentation, of course, but it will be around 250 million. Next slide. And this is a table that shows the different types of products that we plan to offer. We want to be nimble. We want to be flexible. So we're going to be offering products from pre-development loans to acquisition, construction, perm, subordinate debt as well, and gap financing. And in addition to the capitals that is needed for a project, we're also going to be offering rental subsidies for those projects that have units at 30% AMI or below, and operating subsidies for those projects that have 80% AMI or below units. Given the amount of the operating subsidies, I think we're going to probably prioritize it to 50%, but it will allow for some projects to go up to 80% AMI. And that will also cover new construction, preservation, rehab, NOAA, land acquisition. So a very large menu for everything that we know is a need out here in the county of Los Angeles. Next slide. Now this is the timeline. We are currently working on finalizing that NOFA. We expect to release the draft NOFA on September 26th. On that same date, it will begin the 30-day public comment period, and it will be open so that we can receive comments from all of the different stakeholders in our industry. We will also be having listening sessions for the major stakeholders so that we can provide answers or go into more detail as we are entering the public comment period. The public comment period will close on October 27th. Then we will incorporate whatever comments are received, and the final NOFA will be released on November 14th. The NOFA responses are due December 19th. And the preliminary list of the respondents will be released January 19th, with the final selected projects notified by February 16th. So it's going to move pretty fast, but everything gets started by that September 26th date when we first release the draft NOFA. Next slide. Now we are also working on our website. It isn't fully functional yet, but it will be fully functional in a few days. On the website, you will have all of the information related to the NOFA, the guidelines. There will be term sheets for all of the products, but this is also where you will find the form for public comment. So there will be a form very similar to what we did when we released the guidelines. For those of you that participated in that phase of La Casa where we created the guidelines, there will be a form so that you can input written comments, and we will aggregate all of that information. Next slide, please. So again, these are the important dates. The NOFA, draft NOFA gets released September, final NOFA gets released November 14th. The responses are due December 19th, and the selected projects will be notified by February 16th with, at that point, commitment letters. Next slide. And that is the end of the presentation on the NOFA, but I just want to remind everybody that La Casa will be having office hours at the SCANPH conference tomorrow in the networking lounge, which is room 207 and 208 from 1 to 2:30 p.m. There will be 3 of us there to answer any questions. And as always, if you guys have any additional questions or want to just learn more information about our programs, feel free to contact me. We are currently already having conversations with different developers just so that we can help them align as they prepare their responses for the NOFA. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Pass it back to you, Sharon.
Great. Thank you, Claudia. Really excited to see something new on the horizon and more funding available for more housing. And yeah, looking forward to it. Appreciate you being here today. All right, and now I'd like to move to LEHD, and we have Elizabeth Selby, Director of Development and Finance, and Hannah Levin, Housing Program Manager. And after they tell us about their school time happiness and sadness, we'll jump into their presentation. Liz and Hannah.
Little did I know that so many years later, I'd be giving a shout out to Mrs. Hallett for reading the Chronicles of Narnia to us in first grade. And so this took no effort on my part. I just got to sit there and listen. But also she had great acrylic nails and a rocking chair in her class. So if you scored a seat next to her, she would like play with your hair while she read the book. It was heaven. So that's one of my happiest academic memories, I guess. Anyway, okay, back to, oh, Hannah, what's yours?
Yeah, unpopular, but I loved PE. We had jazzercise
That's
classes.
the triathlete.
Yeah, I am still an athlete today. Anyway, that was my favorite class. We got to dance and listen to like 90s pop, so that was cool.
Okay, back to our originally scheduled programming. Thanks for having us today. So we are going to present our Homes for LA NOFA, but I did want to provide just some kind of context or background updates about the housing department in general. As I'm sure most of us are aware, we had, as a result of HHH, which was a $1.2 billion general obligation bond to build permanent supportive housing, we have quite a large portfolio of permanent supportive housing. We see some real needs in that portfolio. We're all aware of Skid Row Housing Trust. And we see that, I think safe to say, that's more indicative of the permanent supportive housing model in general in LA, not just that organization specifically. And so we'll talk about what resources that we're putting out through the Homes for LA NOFA that address preservation. But we also realize like we as a housing department need to find some flexibility to address projects that are struggling, hopefully in partnership with our public funders and our private partners, just to be able to get our permanent supportive housing projects that might not be financially healthy back to being financially healthy to keep projects in operation. So keep that in mind when we're talking about our Homes for LA NOFA. Obviously, this is historic for us in terms of scope and scale. It's $387 million that we've put out. The NOFA is open currently. We'll walk through the programs, as you might imagine, with this level of funding. Very different from HHH because the revenues are generated through transfer tax. It is ongoing, so we expect something akin to this year after year. And we're, this is the first time we're doing it. We're very excited to see what kind of applications we get. And we're very excited to report that back out to our city council, to our ULA oversight committee, and to the public as we progress through this. So I'll kick it over to Hannah to start us on our presentation.
Great, next slide. Yeah, so just a little bit of history of this short program, this program that's just recently kind of happening. The Basically, on our, you can see here on the slide that in April of 2024, the City Council, Los Angeles City Council, approved funding awards for 9 affordable housing projects via the ULA Accelerator Plus program. So that was kind of the first time that we put some of this ULA money out into the world. This money went to projects in need of additional gap financing, very similar to our Fast Track program, in order for these projects to either complete construction or complete their capital stack. Through this initial dispersion of funds, 55.6 million, the department was able to support 795 units of affordable housing. And in December of last year, after about a year-long stakeholder engagement process and in close collaboration with the ULA Citizens Oversight Committee and the City Council, we had the ULA program guidelines adopted. These guidelines are built upon the statutory requirements contained in the measure and provide the basic framework and key parameters for implementation of the programs and the NOFA, which is where we are today. So next slide. So we're just going to dive right into it and give you kind of an overview of what we're offering here. So as Liz mentioned, we are live, everyone. The NOFA application is open. It opened on Friday, September 5th. It will close on October 20th. And I'm going to put our website in the chat. It has all the information you could ever want to know, including the term sheets and our office hours and the contact email and all that good stuff. But anyways, so what's happening with our 7 programs? The Homes for LA NOFA is an umbrella that includes ULA funding and what many of you are familiar with, which we used to call our Affordable Housing Managed Pipeline. It is now called Pooled Sources. Same money, different name, simply a rebrand. So under our larger umbrella, we have 3 main categories. The first is new construction. So pooled sources multifamily, again, same thing as our multifamily new construction AHMP, with a couple differences in process. I get to that later. The ULA multifamily affordable housing program, which is very similar to our pooled sources multifamily program, with a couple differences that Liz will talk about. ULA alternative models, new construction. Again, there are some nuances to this program that Liz will get into, but the bottom line is we have 3 new construction programs available for applicants. Preservation also has 3 programs. So our pooled sources will provide funding for both new construction and preservation. We don't have 2 separate pots of funding with those sources for those separate uses. 1 pot, 2 uses. Similar rules associated because the funding sources are the same. ULA AC Rehab, preserving affordability. This is exciting. As we heard from Marina, they're going to be doing a lot of ULA AC Rehab awards under the 4% program. And this is the first year that we are offering this type of funding source. And then also we have a ULA Alternative Models Preservation Program. Takes a little bit of a different approach. Again, Liz will get into it. And then finally, our Operating Assistance Program. This is not a long-term subsidy program. This is a program designed to provide quick cash infusions to projects that can demonstrate a pathway forward. So Liz will get into all the details, but those are the 7 programs. Next slide. So this is our anticipated available funding for each of those programs. As you can see here, we mentioned $387 million. That's a lot of money. Typically, we only release about $70 to $80 million in our affordable housing managed pipeline. So you can see we have a pretty substantial amount of funds going into our Alt Models new construction program, which we're really excited to launch and see how that works. And then following that, you've got our ULA multifamily program as well. Just as a note, the projections for the ULA funding are actually publicly available on the council file from the first slide, which I can also put in the chat if you're interested to see what we're projecting for next year. The pooled sources funding source is variable because it includes the bulk of that 71 million is home money. And at this time, we don't know what's going to happen with the HUD home money. So those projections are a little bit more unclear. But this is an overview. Next slide. And now I'm going to kick it over to Liz to talk a little bit about where we are coming from in terms of our program design.
Yeah, so thanks, Hannah. One of the things that is different than previous NOFAs, and certainly different than our HHH NOFA, historically, we have had a fixed dollar amount that we contribute to the project. If you're familiar with HHH, that was generally 140,000 a unit with a max contribution cap. We'll in a moment go through the different programs, but we've shifted that to a % of total development cost. Marina touched on this. I can touch on what I have spent the past 2 years doing, which is either supplemental bond requests or our own gap financing. But we realized that we had a real opportunity to contribute more to total development cost, hopefully decrease the amount of requests for supplemental financing, either from us or from the state. Of course, we thought, great, we're going to crack this nut and increase our contribution. Then, of course, we see lots of shifts in funding at the federal level. We'll see what happens when tax-exempt bond debt shifts and tax credit prices probably shift, but our goal here was to come in with a % of TDC to hopefully simplify the capital stack and speed things along a bit. We can go to the next slide. So with regard to our new construction programs, pooled sources, that's home funds coupled with some state and local money pooled together. And we expect that, that those applicants will stack that with tax credits, and our loan limit is going to be 30% of total development cost. Because there are home funds in there, there are also Buy America requirements that are in that, will be required for projects applying to that pool of funds. ULA multifamily is the traditional ULA contribution coupled with with tax credits. Again, we're funding 30% of total development cost. And then there's ULA alt models, which was really designed to simplify the capital stack. Because we assume that our contribution is essentially replacing tax credits, we're funding up to 80% of total development costs, although it's not expressly prohibited that you don't pursue tax credits. The idea was to not have to pursue tax credits. ULA, Hannah, I don't think you specifically touched on this, but ULA, the measure itself, is very clear in how we divide the dollars between the different programs. So hence, ULA multifamily has a specific dollar amount. ULA alt models has a specific dollar amount. Those are our new construction programs. Oh, sorry, I was going to say ULA, I'm sure we all know by now, has a project labor agreement requirement that's in the measure. So while our pooled sources does not have that requirement, it has a Buy America requirement. The ULA models have a PLA requirement. So, sorry, we can go to preservation. So preservation programs, the pooled sources preservation, we don't assume you will be pursuing tax credits there. And we're expecting to fund 30% of loan to cost with a capital needs assessment provided. We have ULA alt models, again, another program we don't expect to be paired with tax credits. We're funding up to 100% of total development cost. And then, and that ULA alt models preservation pool is not tied to expiring covenants. So you have a project that still has, a regulatory agreement on it that has a ways to go you're still eligible to apply for the ULA Alt Models Preservation Program. And then finally, the ULA the ULA ACT Rehab Program up to 30% of TDC, and we assume that you will apply with, stack it with credits. Next slide. And then finally, our operating assistance. Hannah touched on this. Generally, sorry, Hannah, I should know the answer to this. The loans do have to be in our portfolio, or they don't have to. Yes. So you need to have a loan on your project already in our portfolio to pursue ULA operating assistance. This is really for projects where we see that they're struggling, and up to 3 years of operating assistance will kind of get them from red to black, kind of lay out a program where you can hopefully fund some reserves, do some deferred maintenance, and get your project stabilized. So the first time we're doing an operating assistance program like this. And yeah, that's what we have. Very excited, obviously, everyone at the housing department to put this out and see what we get.
Great. Thank you so much. I know 7 programs for us to learn is a lot, but for you all to put it together and administer it is a whole lot. So really appreciate you all and your efforts, and hope this first round goes well. All right, so I'd like to remind attendees, please put some questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, and that way we'll be able to cover them. And we're going until 2:15, so we have some time to cover your questions. Please don't be shy. I'll start off with one that's a recurring theme here. Folks are curious for LEHD and La Casa about, how many NOFAs do you anticipate opening each year? Will this be a once-a-year effort, multiple rounds? Will it be, similar timing every year? So I'd invite LEHD and La Casa to answer that.
Yeah, I will say, because it's transfer tax, we're eager to get the money out as quickly as possible. So we're anticipating twice a year. We have to do it once a year. I think we will move to twice a year because we want to spread the workload, number one, but also get the money going. Maybe a pipe dream, but in the future, because this is an ongoing source, if we could do over the counter rather than funding rounds, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. There are opportunities like that out in the world. And so, but for now, I think we'll plan on 2. And we wouldn't go, once we have that under our belt, I don't think there'd be a compelling reason to go back to once a year.
Yes, and as far as La Casa, this is our first one, as many of you know. So we expect the next one to be a lot earlier in the year. This one was delayed because we had to do a lot of other pieces that were requirements in order for us to do an OFA. And just like what Liz said, for us, eventually, I think in a few years, we expect it to just be on a rolling basis. But definitely for the first 2 years, there will be a large NOFA like this one.
Great. Thank you. Thanks all. And let's see. Oh, there's a question about, will LEHD also be managing LA City's La Casa funding? So both for the PPO monies and the RPHP. So you have 2 new big monies.
Yeah. Yeah, we will be managing that. It's a little premature for us to know where we're going to fold that money into our NOFA. The requirements of the La Casa money are not perfectly aligned with the requirements of the ULA money. So it may be, rather than 7 programs, we have 8 or 9. We'll also, as I touched on, like ULA is very prescriptive in terms of like how we allocate a dollar to these various programs. The La Casa money is more flexible. So I'm hoping that we use this NOFA to like inform us of demand, and then use that information to guide us on where we put the La Casa money.
Yeah,
Great.
and I just want to add that a developer can come to both the city and La Casa and apply for the same project. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. And I encourage any city that is listening that we should definitely discuss how we can participate and work with each other so that we can stretch out those dollars and fund some of the priority projects. So we're also already having conversations with other cities on that. But yes, you can apply to both the city La Casa money and the agency La Casa money.
Great, thanks. And Claudia, you touched on something that I've been wondering about, which is how is La Casa partnering with all of the eligible jurisdictions to sort of make sure that your agency programmatic guidelines align with what the eligible jurisdictions might be putting out. So so developers aren't, trying to fit too many small boxes and being torn, in different directions as they try to go for this money.
So we try to keep the capital as flexible as possible. And, but there's guidelines that we still have guidelines to follow. And the cities, as long as they fall within that box that is called the guidelines, they can go ahead and submit and prepare a NOFA and publish a NOFA. If there's a program that is not in the guidelines, then they just need to bring it back to La Casa for board approval. But the guidelines are pretty flexible, and I think it fits a lot of what we at least heard when we did the landscape read from the cities. I think a lot of that ended up in the guidelines.
Great. Yeah. And I know one interesting feature of both the La Casa funding and the ULA is you're bound by the language in the measures that are funding each of these programs. And so, we we all might want things that just aren't possible, right? And that's something that
Sometimes, yes.
so it goes. Okay, great. Let's see. There is a question about, let's see. Eduardo has a question about, can a city within a COG jurisdiction apply to both the La Casa countywide NOFA and the regional COGS NOFA?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Great. And I'll just keep it with you for right now, Claudia. For the La Casa operating subsidies, a question from Will Sager, will this be based on a per unit basis or some other method?
It's on a per unit basis. And one item that is important to point out is that because we require a minimum of 10% of the units being at 30% AMI and a minimum of 10% being at 50% AMI, we are also going to be providing rental support or operating support related to those units. So it is on a per unit basis.
Got it. Thank you. Also in the operating assistance land, so this is about the ULA operating assistance. Does the LHD portfolio loan need to still be outstanding, or will an existing regulatory agreement with LHD suffice?
We'll get back to you, Will.
I was gonna say, Hannah, give a shout out to our office hours.
Yeah. And Will, you've asked a bunch of really good questions already, and I hope we've answered them. So we are still working through some of the questions like that. We have office hours available on Tuesdays from 4 to 5, and then Thursdays from 1 to 2. And yes, we're still holding office hours tomorrow, even though I will be at SCANPH, the SCANPH conference. I'm going to step out. And so we do our best to answer those questions in the office hours in real times. And also those are opportunities for people to ask programmatic questions, or if there's technical issues with the application or your performa or whatever, our IT team is there. We also are taking questions via email and publishing answers on the website. We've published 2 batches already. They're at the bottom of the page. And we're trying to do that on a weekly basis. So I will add that question to our ongoing document that encapsulates that. But yeah, we're still kind of working through some of those details, and appreciate you asking the questions so that we can be better prepared next time.
Thanks, Hannah. Question from Stephen. What is the geography for the La Casa NOFA, and what are the loan limits?
So the agency pool is for all 88 cities and the unincorporated areas of the county. So it's a regional plan that includes everybody within LA County. What was the second part of the question?
What are the loan limits?
Oh, the loan limit. So the loan limits will depend on the product itself, and it will be part of the term sheet that will be released as part of the NOFA.
Stay tuned. Yeah. And Tia Patterson is asking, will you all partner with CDFIs to administer any of this funding?
So we, La Casa is looking at creating two different funds, one for preservation and a second one for homeownership. And we have thought about having a fund manager manage those funds, whether it's a CDFI or another type of manager that has experience managing those types of funds. That will be a second year item. It's not part of this current NOFA though.
Great. Thanks. So I think we've heard a lot from LAHD and La Casa about having a balance of funding for preservation and new construction. So I'd like to hear, and we've heard a bit from Marina on that, but I'd like to hear particularly from Marina and Zach. How are your agencies sort of weighing the need between preserving our existing affordable housing and focusing on new construction?
Well, I mean, you heard me touch on this a little bit. I want people to understand that HAP actually is a preservation source. And actually the rules governing current and future funding will be tied to that. Jurisdictions are going to have to show how they're preserving their existing stock before they do new stuff, basically. And so that is actually a quite important tool for sustainability, or maybe not like rehab preservation writ large, but certainly for maintenance of current, levels of housing, especially as it pertains to projects that are serving folks who used to be homeless. I mean, obviously, we're very happy that we pushed for and got our preservation program at the state level. We don't currently have any funding right now, but obviously, that's something that we see as a big need. The only other thing I'll suggest, and maybe a little under the radar, but was a priority for us, the state, in terms of maximizing the tools we have available, is we got in the budget something we call an excess equity policy, which allows our existing properties to essentially tap into, if they do have equity in the project, to essentially tap into that equity and use it for other kind of specified purposes that still serve housing, including preservation. And so, that is something that is brand new, but it's something we've been working on for a while. It kind of got stuck in legislative limbo for a couple of years, and we were able to get it across the finish line in the budget, which is a really helpful tool for us because it puts in statutes and authorities that we needed to do it. And so actually I really, for folks who have an existing portfolio with us, that's something to really look at. We're looking to do a couple quickly and have some guidelines out as soon as we can. And so those are just a couple of the areas, we're focusing on, obviously in a more scarce resource environment than we used to have.
Marina?
Yeah, and I just, the only thing I could really add is that, it's been a tough environment the last 5 years because there's been such a strain on bond availability and so many projects in the pipeline that had gotten some form of state or local assistance in particular, as well as sort of other projects that also were able to move forward without additional soft funds. And so there really was that focus on new construction because the last thing we wanted to do was tighten up that availability even more. But I think that's why we're particularly mindful with the 25% test, that it's a real opportunity for us to still serve, those projects that, we need to have a consistent pipeline of new construction. I think we need to be mindful with resources that in the future, as they do roll out, that we kind of keep a steady flow of projects that have soft funds. And sort of, these different channels of types of projects, projects that don't have soft subsidy, and then those that do, and then rehabs in the system. But I think, again, we have more of an opportunity now because there's going to be so much of the demand is going to lighten up over the next, in particular, year and a half. And we'll really be able to see kind of what happens in 2026 with the pipeline and kind of how much pressure still remains. And I think a lot of big changes might be coming, probably in 2027 and onward, once we have a better sense of kind of the back, like what we've been able to clear of the backlog and how do we kind of set a more steady kind of path forward from that point on.
Great, thanks. And so I'd also like to hear, I know that we're well aware of the federal budget and funding risks and pressures, but we also know that City of LA, County of LA, State of California, I'm sure other counties in SoCal are experiencing local budget crises, and was wondering if each of you could speak a little bit about how those local budget shortfalls are impacting your agencies and your work. And anybody can start, or I can call on somebody.
I'll start. I think La Casa is slightly different in the fact that we have the Measure A money. So we receive Measure A, so it's a sales tax. There will be, of course, ebbs and flows depending on the economy, but it is a source that never sunsets. So we will always have Measure A as long as, of course, we do everything well. But we are trying to address some of the shortfalls that we are seeing because of the cuts at the federal level. And of course, the amount of capital that we receive is nothing compared to the cuts that are occurring at the federal level. But because of the need, we are offering the rental subsidy and operating subsidy. And those have a term of 15 to 20 years, so that at least a developer that gets the subsidy, it is a financeable product that contract gives them. So they can take this to a bank and secure financing by having a 15 to 20 year term contract.
Thank you.
I think obviously the city is facing a large budget crisis outside of just the housing department. The housing department is one of the few departments that's supported by fees generated inside the department and or funding sources that only come to the housing department. ULA is a good example. We will have the opportunity to hire additional staff to help us administer these 7 programs with the admin dollars associated with that source. Also, home funding from the federal government is also a pretty significant source of funding for staff in the housing department. So if that funding source goes, our staff shrinks as a result of that. So while other departments in the city did see staff cuts for the first time since maybe 2008, the housing department was lucky enough not to experience that. However, we also, throughout the years of the pandemic, relaxed a lot of our requirements on some of our borrowers and in repaying some of our residual receipt loans as part of the kind of consequences that a lot of projects faced during the pandemic. And so that reduction in income for us also has shifted a couple resources around related to staffing for the department as a whole. We are now a little bit more dependent on some of that program income than we ever have been. So I don't think it's like we need to, it's not SOS, but we are certainly not blind to the factors and the realities that the city is facing as a whole. And we all know this, if there are no PBVs, like our capital dollars will look different. And so we may need to shift our focus to just preservation for a while, depending on how far the operating dollars can get us. So those are some of the impacts I think the department's faced as a result of our local budget crisis cuts.
I'll add, I think the third time I've spoken about this, but ULA is so prescriptive in where we can put money. And some of those ULA programs have a deep affordability targets. And so having to invest money there without PBVs is troublesome.
Yeah, I hear that. All right, well, we have a hard stop at 2:15, so I just want to take this last minute to say thank you to all of you for being here, and hope to see a lot of you at the conference tomorrow. Thanks for our attendees for being here. Hope to see all of you tomorrow. And I know that there will be other workshops about, you know, state reorg type ideas and everything else. So check those out if you have more of those questions. For myself, my favorite topic was science and least favorite was history, I think. So but I've come around on history just outside of the school context. Emily, was there anything else you wanted to say before we end here?
I'll just hop on and reiterate and say thank you to the speakers. Thank you, Sharon, for facilitating the conversation, and to everyone on the call. We're so excited to welcome you to the conference in person tomorrow. Can't wait to see you. Thank you.
Thanks all.